Warning. This episode contains references to extreme violence. Please use discretion when listening.
Okay, wait. To hear others, please join in audio. Wi-Fi? Sorry, I'm a millennial.
Cusp. What are you?
You're Gen X.
No, I'm not. I'm anyone.
Yes, you are.
Okay. New recording. Okay,
Yeah.
It's on.
Hi, Wendy.
Hi, sister.
That's my older sister, Wendy. She got up extra early one morning so that she could drop off her 3 kids at school before getting on a Zoom with me. For the record, she is technically a millennial, but I think she acts more like a Gen Xer. I wanted to talk to Wendy because we've finally gotten to a part of the story that I kind of remember. Wendy and I are 8 years apart, but we both grew up in LA. My parents left El Salvador in 1981, a year when the Civil War was at its worst. They ended up in Los Angeles, along with thousands of other Salvadorans who were fleeing the war. They slept on kitchen floors and couches until they could get on their feet. Eventually, they scraped together enough money to buy an old, rundown house, the one that me and my sister Wendy grew up in.
But do you remember how often we would get rats from the park?
Oh my God, that was the most disgusting part, yeah. The rats and I think you got bit by one time.
Yeah. I tried to pet it, but I was scared to pet it with my hand, so I pet it with my foot and it bit my toe.
It bit your toe. I didn't even know what it bit, but I just remember, you got bit by it. Ugh.
My family spent the 90s trying to survive in that beat-up old house. It was in South Central LA, on a street that had an hourly motel on one corner and a crack house on the other. It was dangerous in more ways than one. My parents had very strict rules for me and my sisters. No playing outside after dark. No walking anywhere alone. Go straight to school and come straight home. Honestly, it sucked. We ended up staying inside and playing Super Mario a lot. But there was only so much that they could protect us from, because the reality of living in the hood was inescapable.
At what point did you become aware that there were gangs in the area that we were living in?
Right away. Right away.
Gangs, mostly divided by race, were everywhere in our neighborhood. The Crips and the Bloods, which were mostly black gangs, and the Mexican Mafia were fighting it out for control of the streets of LA. And in response to the gang violence, thousands of Salvadoran refugees that had come fleeing the war would start to create gangs of their own.
I had a little boyfriend. I don't remember if it was 7th grade or 8th grade. I think probably 8th grade. It was the one that gave me the teddy bear that my dad ripped up to shreds the second I got home. But he, unfortunately, I ended up learning months later, that he had gotten shot and killed because he was a little gang member.
And how old was he?
He was probably 13.
Gang violence that started out in our neighborhood in LA would transform life for Salvadorans. And not just the ones in Los Angeles, but in El Salvador too. While the war in El Salvador was ending, Salvadoran gangs in LA were forming. MS-13 and Barrio 18, 2 of the most notorious gangs in the world, were born in my backyard in LA. These gangs would rule the next 30 years of Salvadoran life and cause more death than the entire Civil War put together.
Tonight, we take you inside one of the most dangerous countries on earth, a place where criminal gangs control entire neighborhoods. And these gangs from El Salvador are now operating in nearly every corner of America.
I'm Jasmine Romero, and this is Sacred Scandal, Nation of Saints. Episode 9, The Gangs. We'll be right back after the break. If you ask the average American what they know about El Salvador, they will probably answer you with one of two things. Either one, pupusas, and to be fair, they are delicious. Or two, gangs. Since the end of the Civil War, El Salvador's gang problem has been the #1 news item about the country.
El Salvador has long been plagued by stratospheric levels of gang violence.
Like tens of thousands of people who grew up in the shadow of the Civil War perpetuated the cycle of violence by joining street gangs.
In 2015, there were more than 6,500 murders in El Salvador, the worst murder rate in the world.
But these gangs, they didn't just spring up out of nowhere. They came out of the US, specifically California, from families like mine, who came fleeing the war and found that California wasn't the peaceful paradise they were hoping for.
They started off as young stoner kids who, out of immigrant loneliness, would come together to smoke pot, listen to Ronnie James Dio, Metallica, and cumbias and other music on their boom boxes.
That's Roberto Lovato. He's a Salvadoran American journalist, professor, and writer who grew up in California. He was one of those lonely immigrant kids. In the late 80s, while the war in El Salvador was at its peak, he was in California, working with an outreach group for recent migrants. And he started noticing some strange patterns.
But they started going to schools like in the San Fernando Valley and other places, in Sherman Oaks, and they were facing Crips, Bloods, and Mexican kids who were linked to the Mexican mafia now.
Migrants coming into low-income areas were easy targets for the more established gangs that already existed. So these Salvadoran migrant kids, they start banding together and creating little gangs of their own.
So these Salvadoran kids found themselves being threatened by Crip gang and Mexican mafia. And so to defend themselves, they started taking on machetes that I would see them buy at a store like at Liborio's in Pico Union. Turns out they were using them to defend themselves against heavily armed gangs.
Barrio 18 and MS-13 get their start as small street gangs. But as the violence in LA escalated, more and more of these Salvadoran immigrant gang members started being sent to California prisons. Prisons where long-established gangs were in charge. And these little disorganized Salvadoran gangs, well, they start taking notes. They begin to transform.
And so that's where MS-13 starts taking on the structures and culture and practices like jumping in for 13 seconds, getting beat up to join the gang for 13 seconds, right? And so then the language, the tattoos, the violence, and the very structured nature of these gangs comes from California.
La Mara Salvatrucha, also known as MS-13, becomes the hardened and sophisticated gang we know today within those California prisons. They learn how to run extortion rings, how to exert control over territory using violence and fear, how to turn a gang into a business. And in the early 90s, the US decides that it doesn't really want to deal with these gangs anymore. Just as the Salvadoran Civil War is coming to an end, the US starts deporting thousands of migrants, especially those with criminal records.
We are a nation of immigrants, but we are also a nation of laws. That's why our administration has moved aggressively to secure our borders more. We will try to do more to speed the deportation of illegal aliens who are arrested for crimes.
The mass deportations really get started in 1996 under President Bill Clinton. His administration passed a law that made it easier to deport immigrants with criminal records.
And pretty soon, this country that's just coming out of the war in the early 90s has all kinds of guns everywhere because they were left over. Nobody not all of them were destroyed. So these kids who are already exposed to Mexican gang cultures and structure start implanting where the violence gets put on steroids because of the availability of guns.
It was like an infection meeting an open wound. Not only was El Salvador still full of guns left over from the war, it was also full of people who had been in that war. Children who had grown up traumatized by extreme levels of violence. Kids who had one or both parents killed in the war. Or kids that were left behind by parents who had immigrated to the US. Kids looking for a family. By the late 90s, El Salvador was one of the poorest countries in the world. The economy never truly recovered after the war, and young people had very few opportunities to advance. So these newly deported gangs move in, and they solve two societal problems for thousands of angry young people. They provide a sense of family, of community, and they provide a job by charging rent to regular Salvadorans, a fee for living within gang territory. By the mid-2000s, what had started as little cliques in LA had become one of the world's most deadly and organized criminal organizations. And it became the only story that the world knew about El Salvador.
In El Salvador these days, there's one murder an hour for a pretty small country, only 6 million people. It doesn't take long when you're, going out at night to stumble upon a scene like this with a body laying dead in the streets. And that's pretty much what people here are living with, these just constant shootings and murders.
Right now, El Salvador is on track to be the nation with the highest homicide rate in the world.
The gangs were the warnings of the murdered Jesuits come to life. Father Ignacio Martín Barrio had theorized that the trauma of war would leave the Salvadoran society with a militarized mind, that violence would become the default solution for all of society's problems. And that was true not just for the gangs, but also for the government. Over the years, the Salvadoran government has tried to handle the gang problem by meeting violence with violence. In 2003, the Arena-led government put in place its Plan Mano Dura, Plan Iron Fist, a police crackdown on these gangs, followed in 2004 by the creatively named Plan Super Mano Dura, Super Iron Fist. And these crackdowns led to the rise of an old tactic: death squads. Police officers going out in the dead of night to kidnap, torture, and kill. But this time, targeting the gangs. And though there have been attempts to rehabilitate gang members too, overwhelmingly, the plans that have received the most funding and support in El Salvador were ones led by the military and police. For most of my life, the gangs have been the only story told about El Salvador. And it's one that I know really well, because my family has lived it firsthand. We've had people in the gangs, and we've had people killed by the gangs. It's a cycle that's best explained by someone you've heard from before, my tía Vilma.
¿Usted conoció de gente que...?
Oh, sí, mucho. Mucha gente. Mala. Porque los que me mataron mi hijo, pues eran bien conocidos. A Marco Tulio. A mí me mataron el tercer hijo. Me lo mataron bien feo.
I've known a lot of people in the gangs, she says, like the ones who killed my son. That's after the break.
Mi nombre es Vilma Miriam Lizama Reyes. Soy de Salvador, San Miguel Oriente.
¿Y usted quién es?
Yo soy...
en relación a mí, ¿quién es?
Soy tu tía. Soy una tía muy querida para ti y tú para mí.
That's my tía Vilma. You might remember her from a previous episode. She's the aunt that takes no shit. She's little, about 5'4", but I've seen her cuss out men that are twice her size. Which is why it was always so strange that her son Tulio, my cousin, was such a sweet kid.
Era muy querido él.
¿Por qué?
Y porque es que él se llevaba bien con todo el mundo. Era bien chacalaquero, él se llevaba muy bien con todo el mundo, muy amable, muy educado. Para mí fue un hijo ejemplar. No tengo otro hijo como ese.
Tulio was small, like his mom, but with a big mouth. I remember hanging out with him when I was a kid, on our yearly trips to El Salvador. He was about my sister's age, 8 years older than me, with cocoa brown skin and dark eyes that were crowded with thick eyelashes. And he always had this sly smile on his face.
Para mí era mi niño. Él dormía conmigo. Él dormía en mi misma cama con él. Él sus pantaloncitos siempre, y cuando yo me cambiaba delante de él, ¡mami, cúbrete! Porque cuando me iba para el baile, yo me cambiaba delante de él y me le decía, date vuelta para allá. Y a él se tapaba su carita con la colchita y ya.
Just like with my tía Margarita, my tía Vilma had a real soft spot for Tulio. Tulio was always the one telling her not to be so loud or crass, chastising her with a, "Mommy!" Tulio grew up in San Miguel, and because he was small for his age, he was able to get through most of his childhood unscathed. But when he turned 15, he finally arrived at a rite of passage for Salvadoran boys.
En la escuela me lo golpeaban. Una vez me lo golpearon todo. Yo era bien bruta porque me dijo él, fíjate mami, me dice que me acaban de golpear los bichos. Me dijo que querían que me brincara la mara. Le digo yo, ¿y quiénes son esos hijos de su madre? Decime quiénes son, le dije yo.
He was jumped, beat up by some boys at school. Boys that wanted him to join their gang. This was pretty typical. Once a boy was of a certain age, he was expected to join the gang that controlled the territory that he lived in. And for Tulio, that meant MS-13. When he came home from school covered in bruises, my tía Vilma got her machete off the wall and told Tulio to point out the kids that had beat him up.
Allí lo agarré y lo planacié todo y le dije yo que si me volvía a tocar el cipote, le dije yo, se las iba a ver conmigo. Le dije.
My tía Vilma whooped their asses. She went straight over to those kids' houses and in front of their moms, whooped their asses with the flat side of her machete. And she told them that the next time they jumped her kid, they wouldn't be dealing with her. They'd be dealing with his father, a colonel in the military. Which is totally not true. But the lie worked. They left Tulio alone for a while. But when he turned 17, the beatings started again, but worse.
Puta papa, le dije yo, ya no puedes estar aquí, le dije. Ya no puedes estar aquí. En eso que mi hermana me dijo, yo me voy a ir para Estados Unidos, me dijo mi hermana, Mila. Entonces le dije yo, ¿de verdad te vas a ir? Le dije, sí. Vaya, pégátele a tu tía Mila, le dije yo.
These weren't just kids jumping him in anymore. These were grown men, sending Tulio a message. My tía realized that if Tulio stayed in San Miguel, he'd either end up in one of the gangs or dead. She had watched my other cousin, Chico, join MS-13 and watched him slowly cover himself with tattoos. Eventually, Chico landed in a Salvadoran prison for life. It was a future that she didn't want for her son. My tía Vilma decided to send Tulio north, to the US. Another one of my aunts was planning on crossing over, and Vilma asked if she would bring Tulio along. Tulio crossed the border in 1999. For a while, he stayed with an aunt in LA. Then he stayed with another cousin. But there's a saying in Spanish about guests and the dead, that they both start to stink after 3 days. After couch surfing with various family members, Tulio had to find his own way. He ended up working odd jobs, delivering newspapers, packing boxes at a juice factory, and sending money back to my tía whenever he got a chance.
Me ayudaba, sí. Me ayudaba con $100 al mes, a los 15 días. Cuando él supuestamente les oraba o trabajaba. Como allá se paga caro todo, decía él, de que las rentas, mami, los biles, nomás esto me quedó para mí y le voy a mandar unos centavitos a usted.
And my tía Vilma needed a lot of help. Because back in San Miguel, MS-13 was extorting everyone, charging rent for living in their territory. Even someone like Vilma, who didn't have a lot of money, and was still loading baskets full of chilate to sell in the market. She came home one day to find that her neighbor had a message for her.
Me dice la vecina, aquí le dejaron este sobre. ¿Y quién? Le dije yo, ¿verdad? Un sobre Manila. ¿Quién me lo? No sé, me dijo, ahí lo dejaron, que era suyo. Pero no vi quién me lo vino a dejar, va, dijo la babosa.
A manila envelope. The neighbor said that she didn't know who it was from. Inside the envelope was a flip phone and a note.
Y en la carta decía, señora Vilma, tenga muy buenas tardes. Le estamos saludando de la MS-13, me dice. Y digo yo, ay, me puse a reír. Estos bayuncos, qué broma más tonta me están haciendo.
The note said, Miss Vilma, greetings from MS-13. At first, my tía thought it was a joke or something, but she quickly realized that this was serious. The note was full of details about my tía Vilma's life.
Dónde vivía, dónde estaba mi familia, dónde estudiaban mis hijos y hasta lo que yo comía.
The note warned her that if she wanted to stay alive, she would have to start paying rent to the gang. Within minutes of her opening the envelope, the flip phone that was inside started ringing.
Y pues yo lo contesté, va, y le digo yo, ay, ¿qué pasó? Yo malcriada, va. ¿Qué pasó? ¿Con quién hablo? Que mire, señora, me dijo que le estamos pidiendo de favor, me dijo que nos tiene que colaborar con nosotros, me dijo.
It was a gang member calling to get her response to the note. As my tía was telling me this story, I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. If it was me, I probably would have lost it. But my tía, well, she's made of tougher stuff.
¿Sabes qué, vos bicho pendejo? Le dije yo. ¿Vos a mí me pensás fariciar? Le dije yo. ¿Quién te crees que eres tú para exigirme a mí? ¿Quién te crees tú que eres? Vos a mí no tenés que venir a salvequearme, le dije. Grandísimo hijo de P, le dije yo. ¿Oíste? Le dije yo. Vos a mí no me vas a fariciar, le dije.
She got on the phone and she told him, "Listen up, you little shit. I don't know who you think you are, but I'm not paying you a dime. I've got 2 sons who are higher rank than you in the gangs, and if you don't leave me alone, I'll have them take care of you." Which was completely not true. But she did have my cousin Chico, the one who was in prison. She called the prison that my cousin was in and asked him if he would back her up and get the gangs to leave her alone. She said the whole time that she was on the phone, her legs were shaking so hard that it rattled the table.
Pero yo me hacían las patillas así, ¿ve? Así me hacían las patillas, yo con el cigarro aquí, ¿ve? Me temblaban las tapas de nervio, pa. Y nunca me habían amenazado de esa manera.
The relationship with my cousin Chico is complicated. He had lent his name to the family before, offering them protection through his connection with the gangs. But we also suspect that he's responsible for some shootings that have happened around my family, including one that killed my uncle. Chico agreed to cover my tía, and after that phone call, the gangs left my tía alone for the most part. But that's just how it was in El Salvador. There was no escaping the gangs. They were a part of everyday life. And every day, my tía was thankful that my cousin Tulio was in the US, far away from that life. But about 8 years after Tulio left to live in California, he suddenly appeared on her doorstep, back in San Miguel.
¿Y por qué se vino Tulio de Estados Unidos?
No sé si lo deportaron porque él a mí no me dijo. Él me dijo que había venido a pasear.
He told my tia Vilma that he'd come back to visit her, but the truth was, he'd been deported. While in the US, he and a bunch of friends had started an illegal street racing ring. He was one of the organizers, and he got arrested in 2007 for his part in it. When he got back to El Salvador, he told my tia Vilma that he was only going to stay for 6 months, until May 10th, Mother's Day, so that he could celebrate with her. Then he'd figure out a way to get back across the border and get back to work.
Estaba recién venido a Estados Unidos y solo iba a pasar Día de la Madre conmigo, que era el 10 de mayo. Y a él me le arrebataron la vida el 3 de mayo, el Día de la Cruz de aquí.
On the afternoon of May 3rd, he went out to play soccer with some other guys in the neighborhood.
A mí me dice, ahí están los bichos jugando pelota, voy a ir a jugar pelota un rato. Vaya, hijo, le dije yo, pero ya te voy a hacer la entomatada para que comas, le dije yo, con quesito así como a ti te gusta. Y me dice, ya, mami, ya vengo, nomás voy a ir a dar una buena pateada allí y unos 2 golitos y ya vengo, viejita, me dice, y se fue.
My tia told him not to go out for too long because she was making him lunch, his favorite tomato stew. A few minutes later, a kid from the neighborhood came running up to my aunt's door.
Mami, 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 me decían los hipotes, mataron a Marco, a Tulio, me decía. Y le digo yo, ¿qué decís, bopayunco? Le dije yo al bicho, ¿va? ¿Y qué decís?
She thought they were kidding at first. The words didn't even register. But they kept yelling at her. They killed Tulio. They killed Tulio. She ran to the playground where he'd been playing, and she found her son, crumpled on the floor.
Cuando yo llegué, que estaba él embrocado así, y su hoyo acá blanco, blanco, toda esta parte de aquí de la frente blanco, así la gran masa para afuera.
What startled her most was the color, the bright white color of Tulio's skull. He'd been shot 3 times, once in the chest, once in the back, and once in the back of his head. She knelt down beside his body and cradled her son in her arms.
Nunca pensé llegar a este momento, hijo, le dije. Te llevas todo mi corazón, le dije yo. Te llevas todo mi alma entera, le dije.
She prayed over him, told him how much she loved him. She asked God to take care of him. She doesn't know how much time passed. The next thing she remembers is a policeman asking her to step away from the body.
Cuando en eso que yo me abrí los ojos, me agarró la policía de aquí y me dijo, quítese, señora, me dijo, usted no puede estar tocando al muerto. Y me levanté yo y le dije, ¿y por qué no lo voy a tocar? Le dije yo. ¿Por qué no lo voy a tocar si es mi hijo? Le dije yo. ¿Por qué? Dígame, ¿por qué? Y me volví a hincar con él yo y lo abracé y lo besé. Y me quité y le dije, vaya, ya está, cómaselo, le dije yo. Si eso es lo que usted quiere, le dije, que yo no vea a mi hijo y no lo toque, le dije.
The details around Tulio's death are uncertain. I spoke to a lot of family and people who knew Tulio at the time, and they all have different theories about why he was killed. Some say that a couple of days before his death, he'd gotten into an argument with a security guard who had connections to the gangs. Others say that Tulio had witnessed a gang murder, and that's why they came after him. But the thing that everyone I spoke to agreed on was that Tulio wasn't in a gang himself, and that he was killed by MS-13.
Mi hijo tenía 25 años cuando me lo mataron. Es duro solo el que no sabe perder un ser querido de la manera en que se los arrebatan a uno, todo por no quererse meter a las pandillas.
In the aftermath of Tulio's murder, my tia Vilma was asked to go to the police station to look at mugshots and try to identify his killers. But she never did. The fact is, everyone in the neighborhood knew who had done it. MS-13 did little to hide their responsibility for Tulio's murder. But to identify them would have been a death sentence. They'd just come and kill you next. And your family, too, just to prove a point.
Así.
Ay, tía.
Que le queden las cosas a Dios y Dios se va a encargar de los que lo hicieron. Porque de la justicia de la ley se pueden escapar, como le dije al detective, porque me dijo que esto no se puede quedar así. No, señor, le dije yo. A mí no me hable de que esto no se puede quedar así, le dije. La ley de la justicia, le dije, es una corrupta, le dije. La ley de la justicia es una basura, le dije yo. Pero de la ley de Dios, le dije, con esa no juegan, le dije yo. Y yo todo se lo he dejado en manos al Señor, le dije. Él va a tener la justicia, le dije.
I don't believe in man's justice, she says. It's corrupt. But you don't play with God's justice. Whoever did this, they'll have to answer to the Lord. I don't know if they'll ever answer to the Lord or not. All I know is the suffering that I see on my aunt's face. The loss, first of a sister to the death squads, then of a son to the gangs. As of this recording, 7 of my family members are in prison for gang-related crimes, and 6 have been killed in gang-related violence. I'll be honest here. For most of my life, El Salvador felt like a place beyond saving. My parents have always talked about it with a love and affection that I didn't understand. Like El Salvador was the one that got away. When they would talk about wanting to go back there to retire, my first thought was always, why? What for? But in 2019, something happened that changed the way that my parents thought about El Salvador. It changed the way that the whole world thought about El Salvador.
Este día inicia la nueva historia que vamos a escribir juntos. Nuestro país es como un niño enfermo. Nos toca ahora a todos cuidarlo. Nos toca ahora a todos tomar un poco de medicina amarga. Nos toca ahora a todos sufrir un poco. Nos toca ahora a todos tener un poco de dolor, asumir nuestra responsabilidad y todos como hermanos sacar adelante a ese niño que es nuestra familia, es nuestro país, es El Salvador.
President Nayib Bukele, the self-proclaimed world's coolest dictator, and the future of El Salvador. That's on the next episode of Nation of Saints. Sacred Scandal Nation of Saints is a production of AHA Podcasts in partnership with iHeart's My Cultura podcast network and is hosted and written by me, Jasmine Romero. Produced by Jasmine Romero with help from Alvaro Céspedes. Research and reporting by Jasmine Romero. Edited by Zaire Quevedo. Nation of Saints was recorded in New York City at the Relic Room with engineering by Brett Tubin. Mixing and sound design by Pachi Quiñones. Original music by Golden Minds, Darko and Aime, based on Patrick Hart's original composition. Fact-checking by Erendira Aquino Ayala. Executive producers are Carmen Graterol, Isaac Lee, Rose Reed, and Nando Villa. Our executive producers at iHeart are Giselle Bances and Arlene Santana. Sacred Scandal was created by Melanie Bartley and Paula Barros. For more podcasts, go to the iHeartRadio app or anywhere you listen to your favorite podcasts.